I'd like to welcome Ms. Elizabeth Becker. Good morning to you, and it's a great honor for me to speak with you today. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and it's an honor to be on your program.
Thank you. Thank you very much for making your time to be on our program today. Before I begin my question, I'd like to let our audience of 13 million plus know who Ms. Becker is. Ms. Elizabeth Becker started her career as a Washington Post correspondent covering Cambodia during the Vietnam War, then moved to become the New York Times correspondent. Please correct me if I missed any part of your long list of credentials. In 2002, she won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. She was the senior foreign editor of National Public Radio, where she received 2 DuPont Columbia Awards as executive producer for reporting of South Africa's first democratic elections and the Rwanda genocide. She wrote many books, including one on Cambodia, When the War Was Over, A Modern History and the Khmer Rouge, which she won a Robert F. Kennedy book citation. To great many journalists, Ms. Becker is an expert, not just on Cambodia and Indochina, but also on Africa. She also holds a degree in Indian studies and speaks Hindi. My first question to you, Ms. Becker, from the images out of Kabul, Afghanistan, what are the differences or similarities that you can differentiate from the images out of Saigon, then South Vietnam, and Phnom Penh, Cambodia in April 1975.
Oh.
Are there any parallels?
Okay, you start with the most difficult question. Thank you, Hassan.
I'm sorry. I hope you have
okay.
all the answers.
Okay. It's a question we're all asking ourselves. I was just being a little playful. I think the similarity is emotional. And that's what I would like to start with. The similarity is emotional because it is a people who love their country, who don't want to leave, but don't see any way to continue. And that's the emotional similarity with Vietnam and with Cambodia. How right or wrong they turned out to be is different in all those cases, but it's you can tell yourself it's going to happen. You can, because this is, in a sense, as in Cambodia and Vietnam and in Afghanistan, it should not have been a surprise, but of course it is, because you can never prepare yourself for that. So I would say overall the similarity is the strong emotion, the sorrow, the questioning of what was this war all about. That is the similarity. Now the differences are enormous.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go into the differences now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, to go back in the war, and I'll start with just the evacuations. In Vietnam, the evacuation, they waited forever, and the ambassador refused to call for the evacuation. So it was, in many respects, it was much more chaotic. There was no way that the Americans could try to evacuate all the Vietnamese who worked with them, because there were so many. There were tens and tens and tens of thousands. The American war, the full American war with Americans doing the fighting, was 10 years. The United States, there's never, Afghanistan had nothing like the American commitment, on the ground commitment. So but then the North Vietnamese who won the war, they were not, of all of the different changes, they were the less drastic. Yes, it's communist, so on and so forth, and yes, the re-education camps were horrible. However, there was not this medieval, the medieval Taliban mentality or the Khmer Rouge genocidal. Now, in Phnom Penh, as you all know, I remember I left earlier. I did not stay
Yes.
around for the end. And I left because I was afraid of it. And when I told my Cambodian friends I didn't think this would work out at all and that didn't want to be there, that I was afraid of the Khmer Rouge, they said, no, no, they're Cambodian. It's okay. Once the war was over, it'll be fine, which is why I titled my book that, When the War Was Over. Of course, it wasn't.
Right.
And in contrast to what's going on in Afghanistan, the Khmer Rouge were immediately brutal, immediately homicidal. They immediately made Cambodians leave their home and go on the long marches. They immediately captured and killed the senior leaders.
Yeah.
It was grotesque from the very beginning. But in both Saigon and Phnom Penh, you had none of the news media there.
Right.
And that's what makes the big difference. You did not have the news media there. And then finally, in terms, the final similarity, and this is to the shame of my country, is that the way the United States fought the wars gave the Cambodians, the Vietnamese, and the Afghans not the choice that they pretended to give them. They supported corrupt governments that did not create a military that would fight, and that when the United States said, no, we can't continue, the house of cards fell down. So it was, I hope, finally, see, the one common thread here is the United States, and I hope that the Americans, the American people and the American officials understand that our responsibility is not just right now. It's our responsibility was the whole political and military culture that helped create that.
Yeah. Yes, the Afghan war somehow has faded. The support for the Afghan war has somehow faded away. But we always had a reason to go to war. At least we claim to have one that is legitimate. President Biden said last week, we went to war for two reasons. Quote, one, to bring Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell. The second reason was to eliminate the Al-Qaeda's capacity to deal with more attacks on the United States from that territory. We accomplished both of those objectives, period, end quote. In 20 years, don't you think we have brought some degrees of freedom, introduced some forms of democratic values to the Afghans, and now we give them all up?
See, you just did what, Hassan, I have to tell you, you just did what our government did. You named two very specific goals: the elimination of Osama bin Laden and the elimination of Al-Qaeda. And then all of a sudden you said, but aren't we supposed to be saying there for democracy? Now that wasn't on the list, was it? Your first list, what President Biden said, was on that. Now, and that's the problem with the United States. We keep adding, we keep changing the reason why we're there. An army cannot bring democracy. The people and their government bring democracy. The United States can support it, but if the people and the government don't, and in Afghanistan, yes, a lot of American programs, a lot of NGOs help bring democratic values, but that's not what the war was about. And that is a heartbreaking confusion that serves nobody to say that. Yes, I mean, those are great values, whether they're supported, support came from the United States or any other democratic country. But when you keep confusing the goals, that's when you keep these forever wars, where we could have, if we only had Osama and Al-Qaeda, we could have left a long time ago.
Okay. That's my third question. A new poll by the New York Times that came out yesterday, 74% of Americans, especially veterans, viewed the president's troop withdrawal plans are not good, for lack of a better term. Comparing the evacuation plans President Ford and his top generals made for Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and the evacuation plans currently made by President Biden and his top commanders, which one do you think is more orderly and successful?
Well,
I know all are not good, but
okay. Well, just comparing them, far more have been evacuated in a very short time out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Hands down on the exact how many people have been evacuated. The figure today was astonishingly high. It's I don't think we've had anything like this since the Berlin airlift. It's astonishing. It's very well done in that sense. Did the Afghan government collapse and make it impossible? Yes. Did the Afghan army make it impossible? Yes. Now, on the evacuation from Phnom Penh, who did they evacuate? It was minuscule. It was minuscule.
Oh, yeah.
And what did they leave? They left a country that, as I said, was immediately brutalized. Awful. To compare, I mean, Cambodia, it's to this day, it's the worst. They left a country that had become so corrupt on the government side to be impotent when the Khmer Rouge came. So no, they're wrong on that. And on Saigon, it's still a travesty, I think, that Henry Kissinger got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973 simply for the American withdrawal. Because what happened? As soon as after the withdrawal, it took 2 years, and then then it was over. So I'll just say in the American cliche, it's comparing apples and oranges, and I think people should go back and revisit those.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. I agree with you. When one of your Khmer helpers or interpreters told you that, okay, when the war is over, everything was okay, that's what many of the Khmer people, the Cambodian people, thought at the time. And that's why many decided to remain behind. I was there the whole time, and I know what was going on. Now, for many of us who remember the Vietnam War or the Cambodian War, America blames its ally for corruption, inefficiency, and lack of will to fight before we pull ourselves out of the war. In the case of Cambodia, the U.S. gave full support to the Khmer Republic for just 3 years, then left the remaining 2 years for the regime to defend itself from the Khmer Rouge assault. President Biden refers to these same reasons for withdrawing, in addition to accomplishing the stated objectives in Afghanistan. In your view, do you think we have a better reason to tell the world before we abandon our allies after 20 years fighting shoulder to shoulder?
Well, I disagree with your description, first of all. Yeah. The United States did not fight shoulder to shoulder in Cambodia.
In Afghanistan, I mean.
Okay, well, let's go back to Cambodia because you compared it to Cambodia.
Right.
The United States did not, quotes, abandon Cambodia. They continued paying for Cambodia. The only thing that the United States did was that the Congress said that they stopped the United States from continuing to bomb Cambodia. That's the only change.
Yeah, in 1973, yeah.
And that was August 15th, almost exactly. The anniversary was just recently. And that was all. The money continued. And I would blame the United States for the corruption, not just the Cambodian government, because in all three cases, the United States knew about the corruption. I mean, we all wrote about it. You knew that in all three cases, in South Vietnam, Cambodia government, and Afghanistan, you knew there were ghost soldiers on the payrolls. You knew that the generals were taking a lot of money and putting it in Swiss banks. You knew that when the refugees came into the capital cities in all three countries, they had to pay bribes. You knew that the Cambodian government, the South Vietnamese government, Afghan government was despised by the locals. So it was both, and who gave them the money? The United States government. So I think it's equal, and I think it's hypocritical of the United States to say, "Oh gosh, we can't stay because they are corrupt," because we were essential to the corruption. What they're saying now is not that. I mean, President Biden just said, "We've completed our mission and we're going."
Yeah.
That's different than what you just said about shoulder to shoulder. And and the Americans did not fight. The only country where the Americans did the majority of the fighting was South Vietnam, not in Afghanistan, and certainly not in Cambodia. That's very different. And I wouldn't be surprised in the case of Afghanistan if the United States did not continue to have a relationship.
Okay. I'd like to reflect on history for a moment.
Sure.
History that you were part of it, and you wrote a book about it. In December 1978, you joined your colleagues Malcolm Cadwell and Richard Dutman
Yes.
to meet or try to interview Pol Pot. Can you tell us about your experience while in Phnom Penh after the Khmer Rouge takeover? You told me what your interpreter told you that thing would be okay, when the war.
It wasn't my interpreter, first of all. It was my very good friend, the banker. It was the banker Mekong Pot, who was one of the few Cambodians who was sort of he refused to be part of politics, but was very, very patriotic and very keen. And he stayed, and he survived the Khmer Rouge and then went back to Canada, become a banker. And I write about him. He's the first person I write about in my book. And he's someone who I still May Campot. He was at Banque Khmer pour le Commerce, right there on Mani Vang, the airport road and Mani Vang at that intersection. And Campot, he plays a big role in my book because he represents the Cambodian that we all hoped would become the leaders. He was sympathetic to the ideas of all sides, but realistic about the problems. And sadly, he was wrong that the Khmer Rouge would be okay.
I see. So, but you stay at the hotel, and then you heard gunshots outside the hotel. Is that what happened?
Okay. Oh, so back to December 1978. The three of us were invited we were the first and the last to be invited to Democratic Kampuchea under the Khmer Rouge, because Western journalists, because they knew that they had provoked Vietnam too much and that the Vietnamese would respond. And we went all over the country, not just Phnom Penh. We had 2 weeks there. We went all over the country. And on the very last day, with only an hour in advance notice, we were told we would finally get to interview Pol Pot. So we were staying at the government guest house and taken over to what used to be the French colonial
hotel
headquarters, headquarters right on the river. And it's now the Cambodian Government Department of Development or something. It's right by the Phnom. It's right by the Phnom. Anyway, and then that's where we had the interview. And first it was just Mr. Dudman and myself.
Yes.
And we had sent questions in advance at the very beginning of our 2-week trip because we never knew if we were going to see him or not. And he was more charismatic than I had realized, which sort of makes sense because that's how you become a leader. And he was, but once he started talking, he was a fanatic. And he knew that the Vietnamese were going to attack because he had prompted, if you remember correctly, the Khmer Rouge had prompted a border war with the South, with Vietnam, with communist Vietnam, and wanting,
there were arguments about that. Yes, okay.
And saying they wanted to take back Kampuchea Krom, et cetera, et cetera. It was absolutely insane. And one of the reasons he did it was because he was trying to blame the Vietnamese for all the problems in their own country. So anyway, instead of answering our questions, all he did was spend an hour and a half telling us why the United States and NATO should come to his rescue, the rescue of democratic Kampuchea, when the Vietnamese invaded. And he predicted that Vietnam would not be able to invade without the help of all of the Warsaw Pact countries, which would be those countries aligned with the Soviet Union. And I could not believe what he said. And he went on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And then we left. And then that night, we were very happy it was over because it was sort of like being under house arrest for 2 weeks because we could not move without them moving us. We couldn't do anything. They decided who we would. They decided who would be. We would interview. They decided they would interrupt me if they didn't like my questions, and and plus we knew that the Vietnamese were going to invade. We at least could listen to BBC, and we knew that the invasion had already started. Or at least not the invasion per se, but the back and forth, the beginning of artillery exchange.
Yes, the invasion was launched in December 1978.
Well, was it right after we left? Excuse me, it was right after we left.
Yes.
It was a day after we left.
Yeah. So what did Pol Pot tell you, his justification or his main reason to like transform the country into, such an agrarian state?
Oh, he didn't tell us anything. His people did, but the whole 2 weeks was one big seminar saying that they wanted to get rid of the French influence. They wanted to get rid of the feudal influence. They wanted to wipe the slate clean, and they didn't trust the meritocracy of the other era. They didn't trust the professionals from the other era. They only trusted the farmers and the peasants, and which was this side of crazy, because they had people who were incompetent doing major things and causing mayhem. Cambodia, which should have been able to feed itself, wasn't able to, because people were treated to the equivalent of concentration camps. Yeah. And of course the food wasn't there. And whenever I raised these questions, they would say that I was CIA. And so it wasn't a conversation like you hope I can tell you. It wasn't a conversation at all. It was propaganda. Okay. It was just propaganda. And I think the impression I got above everything else is that underneath that propaganda was not only cruelty. Now, I didn't see any executions or anything like that. They would never let me. But the cruelty was evident in the way they treated people. There were no schools. There were no churches. There were no mosques. There were no temples. There was no marketplace. People were not allowed to do anything but work, and that they had to do from their concentration camps. So what I saw was cruelty and incredible incompetence. They didn't know what they were doing. So whenever they failed, they killed somebody.
Yeah. Okay. Now, our friends and allies have had terrible experiences after joining the U.S. to fight for a cause, because I was part of that war too, just briefly in Cambodia. What is the best way, if you can advise, you think to avoid future catastrophe that we have seen so far?
So you think you were helping the United States when you fought?
No, we were fighting against communism. That's our main focus back then, with the help of the United States.
What communism was it?
Well, okay. We learned then that when the communists took over the country, we would be slaughtered.
Oh, okay. But you thought you were fighting Vietnamese communists.
Yes, that was influence. That was the main influence, and the Khmer Rouge were nowhere to be found. The first few years of, the war.
So the thing that the reason I wanted to underline that is that your country. First of all, the reason you got into the war, even though Cambodia was lucky, no matter what you think of Sihanouk, at least he kept Cambodia out of the war until 1970, and then he was overthrown. And I'm sure one of the reasons that he was overthrown was that the people who did the coup d'état believed that he was too close to the communists, even though he had been able to keep them keep the country out of the war, and they believed that this way they could have the United States help them. And they knew the United States would like them to do it because the United States had been trying to get them to fight anyhow. So that's the first thing, is that inviting or allowing the United States to bring their military into your country is a dangerous proposition if you don't know what you're doing. You wanted me to talk from the Cambodia point of view, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So whether it's inviting the United States or the current situation where Prime Minister Hun Sen has allowed the Chinese such influence, it becomes a carte blanche, And so you see China doing things in Cambodia. My gosh, they own Sihanoukville. They're laundering money through all the construction in Phnom Penh, et cetera, et cetera. So Cambodia has a ridiculously large army, in part because of Hun Sen closeness to China, who keeps supporting that stuff. So Cambodia hasn't learned the lesson, and we see in Afghanistan that the United States hasn't learned the lesson that when you up the wars, you should be much more careful about war, about leading with your military. My country, which I look at our military budget, it's enormous and it keeps growing. Our budget for diplomacy, which should be the way we engage with the world, our budget for diplomacy keeps shrinking. We don't have some of the culture programs we used to have. We should be enlarging our diplomacy budget and tempering our military budget, because engagement should be first and foremost diplomatic. That's people to people. That's what it should be. And that's one of the things I think, if I were looking from the Cambodian point of view and the American point of view, that's what I would say.
Sure. Do you think China's rise to world dominance makes America nervous? You think that's why we kind of equipped ourselves to, be ready just in case? And I'm going to.
Sure. It's not a question of my opinion. This is it. I think it's not my opinion at all. This is all that the policymakers talk about. Whether you're a business person or a military person, whether you're in government, whether you're in academia, everybody's talking about is what kind of a challenge is China a rival? Is China an enemy? All that sort of stuff. That's topic A in Washington.
Yeah. Now, do you think we can learn any lesson at all for America's alliance in the future Indo-Pacific? Because now the focus seems to be moving to that region. Indo-Pacific, the Quad, the Australia, India, Japan, South Korea alliance, and now our forces seem to be deployed. I see the big chunk of it to that part of the world. What is the lesson that we can learn and perhaps teach our friends and allies, close friends and allies?
Well, when you say we, the United States or Cambodia?
Yes. The United States. Yeah, the United States.
Well, the difference between the American presence in Southeast Asia and the Chinese presence is, China is definitely the neighbor. China's there. China knows these countries intimately. The United States is barely there. It leads too much with its military. Our diplomatic efforts are teeny. Our aid is skewed, and we don't have. We're only now. I think the visit by Vice President Kamala Harris shows that this administration understands that they have to do that kind of high level and daily kind of commitment in the region, because we don't do it. We don't do it enough. We've been taking it for granted, and I think.
So we should do more then.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I find puzzling is that we have a big Asian American community in the United States, big and wonderful. You all, Cambodian American, Vietnamese American, Chinese American.
Yes.
Why are we not using our Asian Americans as diplomats, as informal diplomats, to engage us more? I mean, we take it for granted that European Americans are going to be in Europe. Why can't we have Asian Americans in Asia? And I think that's one of the, to me, that's so obvious, and I can't believe we haven't done more with it, which brings me back to Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. She's the daughter of a South Indian woman, and she's going there, and that's a good example of how.
How many countries are?
She's only going to Singapore and Hanoi, and in Singapore, she's had a lot of national security discussions. So far I have not seen any human rights discussions, which I think is important in the region.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we all know human rights is huge in the region, as in lacking thereof. And in Hanoi, I think the accent is going to be on health. I think it's going to be, if my memory serves me, it's COVID, but also just general health. Vietnam has had a success with COVID. I mean, yes, all over the region, sadly there's been a resurgence.
Yeah, Vietnam is better. Yeah.
But I think she's going to be discussing health there.
My final question about Cambodia, since you mentioned what Hun Sen has done and the Chinese influence in Cambodia, possible money laundering in the construction sector. What is the best way for Hun Sen to improve, the lots of his people, the country, suffering from human rights abuses, and the sliding back of democracy and freedom? What would be the best way for him to, or is he stuck in there, he can't do anything, or you think any possibility that he's going to be able to improve that?
Well, the question is, does he want to? And I don't think he wants to. I think he is doing what he wants to do. I don't think it's any coincidence that he went after and got rid of the independent press, the independent opposition, independent NGOs right soon after the election of then President Donald Trump, who made it quite clear that he didn't care about human rights, that he didn't care about, he considered the press the enemy of the people, so on and so forth. So that sort of opened the door for Prime Minister Hun Sen to just get rid of opposition. And it's totally this is not unlike the way he's ruled. And China supports this because China's been able to have a big influence. I mean, Cambodia is considered the most loyal by a long shot of all the countries in ASEAN, and so I don't think, as long as Hun Sen's prime minister, I don't think he will want to change. Now, if he's not prime minister, then that's a different question. Who's going to replace him? So on and so forth.
Right.
But go ahead.
I'm sorry. Talking about his replacement, do you think he's going to be successful in terms of nominating his son to succeed him?
Oh, I couldn't make that prediction. I have no idea. Currently in the whole region, it's very hard to find one country that has democratic elections and where one party is voted out of office and a different party comes in. It doesn't happen in your region. Your region it's sad. Look what's going on in Burma, Myanmar. Look in Thailand. My gosh, they've gone way back. I mean, the military it's a military coup, no matter what they say. Lèse majesté. I mean, they're trying to bring back absolute monarchy. They're going back to 19th century. Singapore has been a one-party system essentially since the beginning. Malaysia's had one chance for Indonesia, one. Vietnam, no. So I would be a fool to predict any kind of new democratic elections in the region.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Elizabeth Becker. Appreciate you making the time to be on our program.
I'd just like to say
it's a very great honor. Yeah, sure, please.
I'd just like to say one thing to the Cambodians who might be listening.
Cambodian friends.
To my Cambodian friends, I really understand how this Afghanistan evacuation can be upsetting. And for all your families and things, but the only thing is that when I think of it, and I think of what you've gone through and what you've accomplished here in the United States and even back in your own country, you have so much to be proud of, and I hope you think of that when you look at Afghanistan.
Yes, will do. Thank you very much, Ms. Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and we'll hope to be speaking with you at some point in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.